On a freezing December evening in New York, a billionaire CEO stopped in front of Lincoln Center and mocked a homeless child. "If you can play Chopin, I'll adopt you." He thought it was a cruel joke. He didn't know those words would shatter his past, ignite a courtroom war, and lead to the one family he never knew he needed. If stories of healing and second chances speak to your heart, please consider subscribing and joining us on this journey. The lights of Lincoln Center shimmered like a crown of gold against the cold Manhattan night. Traffic hummed down Broadway, headlights slicing through the crisp air of the Upper West Side. Carter Hayes stepped out of his black town car, his breath visible in the December chill. At 33, the self-made CEO of Hayes Capital had grown accustomed to this view. The grand fountains of Josie Robertson Plaza, the marbled pillars of David Geffen Hall, the lofty windows of Juilliard just beyond. It was New York's temple of music, and yet tonight he wasn't there for art. He was there for a sponsorship dinner, another chance to polish his reputation as the billionaire patron of culture. But before he crossed the plaza, he froze. Through the glass wall of the lobby, in the shadow of a cleaning cart, sat a small figure with dark brown hair tucked under a threadbare hoodie. The girl couldn't have been older than 7. She had her knees drawn to her chest, a notebook balanced carefully, and her lips moving as if whispering to herself. Carter might have ignored her, security usually swept away strays, but then he noticed what she was staring at, the glossy black concert grand on stage. The child's eyes followed every curve of the Steinway, as if she could hear music inside it. Then she began sketching notes onto the lined page in her lap. Carter, curious, stepped closer to the glass. Her voice, soft, precise, carried through a slight crack in the door. Chopin. Ballade number 1. The left hand carries the storm. The right hand pleads. If the voicing is clear, the heart breaks open. Carter felt his chest tighten. No one had told him this child was here, and certainly no one expected her to dissect Chopin like a conservatory student. He tapped on the glass. The girl startled, clutching her notebook like a shield. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his tone sharper than he intended. She lifted her chin. "Listening." Something in the way she said it, simple, fearless, irritated him. CEOs weren't supposed to be unsettled by children. He gave a short, cynical laugh. "Listening? To an empty stage? Do you even know what that piece is?" The girl's eyes didn't flinch. "Chopin. The Ballade. I know it." Carter's lips curled into a smirk. Perhaps it was arrogance, perhaps defense against the ghost that had risen in his memory, the ghost of a sister who once dreamed of Juilliard but never made it. "If you know it, then play it." He leaned down, his voice edged with irony. "If you can play Chopin, I'll adopt you." The words hung heavy in the air, a joke, a cruelty, a man's attempt to cover the shiver of memory with mockery. The girl blinked, then closed her notebook. "If you're serious," she said quietly, "open the hall." Carter's smirk faltered. For a moment he thought of brushing her off, but something, pride, curiosity, the whisper of his sister's ghost, stirred inside him. He pulled out his phone. "This is Carter Hayes," he told the Juilliard staff line. "I'm requesting access to the hall. Yes, tonight. I'm a corporate sponsor. You know the name." Within minutes, the heavy doors opened. A maintenance worker, Mr. Doyle, an older man with silver hair and weary eyes, gave a disapproving look, but said nothing. He had seen the girl before, sleeping near the Juilliard dormitories, nibbling crackers behind vending machines. For weeks, he had let her stay, quietly ensuring no harm came to her. Tonight, however, he had no choice but to step aside. The child walked past Carter and up the steps, as if she belonged there. Her sneakers squeaked against the marble. She approached the Steinway with reverence, lifting the fall board to reveal the keys. Carter crossed his arms, prepared to witness a mess of banging notes. He'd prove himself right, have his laugh, and move on to his dinner. But when the girl set her small hands on the ivory, the air changed. The opening chords of Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor rang out. Not childish pounding, but carefully balanced voicing. The left hand thundered like distant storms. The right hand pleaded with aching clarity. Her phrasing carried rubato that breathed, not stumbled. Dynamics swelled and softened like tides. Each note seemed to bloom inside the empty hall. Carter's body went rigid. For an instant, he was no longer CEO Hayes. He was a boy again, sitting on the floor outside his sister's practice room, listening as she labored over the same passage. She used to whisper, "One day, I'll play it at Lincoln Center." But she never did. A drunk driver on I-95 ended that dream when Carter was 19. Now, in the same hall, a 7-year-old orphan played the very piece his sister loved most, her tiny shoulders trembling with intensity, her face pale but radiant. Mr. Doyle leaned against the wall, his eyes glistening. He knew what this child had survived, the accident on I-95 that killed both her parents, the shelters that failed her, the nights she slept with cardboard cutouts for keys. She had no one left. Yet here she was, channeling Chopin with maturity no audience could ignore. Carter tried to swallow, but his throat locked. His cynicism fractured under the force of her music. When she struck the final cadenza, her hands racing with impossible clarity, the hall seemed to stop breathing. The silence after the last chord was heavier than the storm outside. Carter's heart pounded. His mockery, those words he'd thrown like a stone, echoed in his mind. "If you can play, I'll adopt you." The girl turned on the bench, her chest rising and falling. "Well?" she asked softly. Carter had no answer. His world, built on deals and arrogance, was cracking. Somewhere deep inside, a memory whispered back, "Don't break her like you broke yourself." The final notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 still seemed to hang in the rafters of David Geffen Hall, like smoke reluctant to drift away. Carter Hayes remained rooted in place, his jaw clenched, his hands tightening into fists at his sides. He had expected clumsy noise, something that would let him dismiss the child and walk away with his armor intact. Instead, he had been dragged backward into a world he had buried for more than a decade. Ava Monroe sat on the bench, her thin shoulders lifting with each shallow breath. Her hands, small and pale, rested on her knees now, trembling as if the music had drained her completely. She did not bow, did not smile, did not even look at him for approval. She looked at the piano, at the long curve of the concert grand, as if it were a friend she was afraid to leave. Carter drew in a slow breath, voicing, rubato, dynamic contour. The terms still lived inside him, the vocabulary of hours spent in practice rooms with his older sister Rachel. She had been 17 when she tried to master this very piece. She used to tell him that the ballade wasn't just a performance. It was a confession, a storm and prayer rolled into one. Carter remembered lying on the carpet outside her door, listening as she fought her way through the cadenzas, whispering corrections to herself. "No, the contour must rise here. Don't flatten the phrasing." And now, in this vast hall, those same words echoed in the playing of a girl who had no teacher, no family, no name in the program. He blinked hard, but the memory wouldn't fade. The accident on I-95 had stolen Rachel before she ever auditioned for Juilliard. Carter had been 19, drunk on ambition and blind to grief. He had thrown himself into finance, built Hayes Capital with nothing but ruthless drive, but every ringing silence between deals carried the outline of her absence. He thought he had buried it with steel and glass. Yet a 7-year-old orphan had just split it open with a cascade of Chopin. Mr. Doyle coughed softly from the doorway. The old custodian's eyes glimmered with pride and sorrow. He had watched Ava huddle on staircases with cardboard keys she had drawn herself, marking fingerings with a pencil stub. "She's been waiting for a chance like this," he murmured. "She doesn't just play notes. She listens." Ava finally turned to Carter. Her eyes were not pleading. They were steady, almost defiant. "You said you'd adopt me if I could play," she said. The words struck him like a hammer. His own voice, mocking and arrogant, replayed in his skull. He opened his mouth, but nothing came. "I didn't say it because I wanted a home," she added, her small voice breaking. "I said it because you didn't believe me. Nobody does." The silence in the hall deepened, thick with truths no gala dinner could wash away. Carter forced himself to step closer to the stage. The CEO mask, the crisp confidence, the shield of wealth, felt heavy, cracking. "Who taught you?" he asked hoarsely. Ava shook her head. "No one. I listened outside Juilliard dorms. Sometimes I sneak in when students practice. Mr. Doyle lets me in after hours. I write fingerings in my notebook." She lifted the battered spiral pad with pride, pages filled with tiny numbers above hand-drawn staves. "If I can't touch the piano, I practice on cardboard." Carter stared at the pad. For a moment, the Wall Street world felt absurd. Billions managed, mergers executed. But this child plays Chopin out of scraps and shadows. She looked down at her shoes, frayed and soaked from the snow. "If I had a piano, I could be better." The simplicity of the statement broke something in him. Rachel had said almost the same words once, pressing her palms against the glossy lid of a practice Steinway. "If I could just have more time, more lessons, I could get there." His throat tightened. He realized he was gripping the rail of the orchestra pit so hard his knuckles ached. From the back of the hall came a sudden sound, applause. A handful of stagehands, drawn by the music, were clapping softly, their faces stunned. The reverberation of their hands echoed through the space, filling the void Carter could not fill with words. Ava flinched at the sound, as though unused to recognition. Her cheeks flushed, and she hugged her notebook to her chest. Carter swallowed against the rising tide in his chest. That was extraordinary. The words scraped out, awkward, unpracticed. Praise was not his language. Mr. Doyle stepped forward, resting a hand on Ava's shoulder. "She doesn't belong on the street, Mr. Hayes. She belongs here." Carter's gaze lingered on the child. Her defiance, her fragility, the storm she had unleashed, it was all too much. He wanted to retreat, to bury himself again in numbers and contracts. But her question still echoed. "You said you'd adopt me." He cleared his throat. I didn't mean..." He stopped. The lie tasted foul before it even left his mouth. Ava's eyes flickered with hurt, though she masked it quickly. "It's okay," she whispered. Adults say things they don't mean. The words stabbed deeper than any market loss ever had. Carter turned away, pacing down the aisle. His mind churned with fragments. Rachel's laugh, the crash report from I-95, the glint of determination in Ava's eyes. He had come for a sponsorship dinner. Now he stood at the threshold of something he didn't understand, something infinitely heavier than stocks or capital. Behind him, the child returned her gaze to the Steinway, her fingers brushing the keys one last time. The hall seemed to sigh as she closed the fall board gently. "Thank you for letting me play," she said, almost too quietly to hear. Carter's chest constricted. He wanted to answer, but his voice failed. Outside, the fountain gushed under the winter sky, tourists snapping photos. The city moved on, indifferent. But inside Lincoln Center, a storm had broken open in one man's heart, and in its wake, nothing would remain untouched. The following morning, the mirrored towers of Midtown reflected a pale winter sun. Inside Hayes Capital's glass-walled headquarters on 6th Avenue, the atmosphere hummed with precision. Assistants tapping keyboards, analysts whispering over charts, the faint buzz of Bloomberg terminals. Yet at the corner office on the 43rd floor, Carter Hayes sat behind his oak desk staring at nothing. The Chopin ballade still thundered in his chest. He had not slept. The girl's words, "Adults say things they don't mean," burned like acid. He was accustomed to controlling markets, shaping mergers with a sentence, bending outcomes with wealth. But he had no defense against a child's quiet disappointment. He pressed a button on the intercom. "Send in Detective Pike." Moments later, the door opened and Lauren Pike strode in. Tall, wiry, with short hair tucked behind one ear, she carried the air of someone who had walked crime scenes at 3 a.m. and refused to flinch. A former NYPD detective turned private investigator, Pike was the one Carter trusted when money wasn't enough, when truth mattered more than appearance. "You sounded urgent," she said, dropping into a chair without ceremony. "It is." Carter leaned forward, folding his hands. "I need you to investigate a child." Her eyebrow arched. "You'll have to be very careful how you phrase that." "I mean it literally," he said, impatient. "A girl, 7, maybe. She calls herself Ava Monroe. She played at Lincoln Center last night." "The gala?" "No, unofficially." He hesitated, ashamed. "I challenged her. She played Chopin. Perfectly. She has no parents." Pike studied him, her silence deliberate. "Why you?" Carter exhaled. "Because I opened my mouth. Because if what she said is true, she's out there with nothing but scraps. I want to know who she is, where she's from, and why no one is protecting her." Pike pulled a notebook from her jacket. "All right, I'll start with the basics. ACS records, death certificates, anything that matches her name. You're aware this could get messy." "I don't care," he snapped, then softened. "I mean, just find the truth. Quietly. No press." She nodded. "Give me 48 hours. By nightfall, Pike was already sifting through databases. Old instincts returned, the rhythm of running queries through the NYC Administration for Children's Services, cross-referencing with Connecticut's Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. She traced federal accident reports along I-95, scanning for casualties with the surname Monroe. There it was: Michael Monroe, age 38. Sarah Monroe, age 35. Fatal collision, New Haven County. Date, 18 months prior. Survived by 2 children, Ava and Ethan. Ethan, infant male, deceased at scene. Only Ava remained. Pike chewed the end of her pen. She filed a FOIA request for court filings in Connecticut, then pulled up records of temporary shelters in Queens and the Bronx. One entry snagged her attention. Ava M., female minor, intake at East Elmhurst Temporary Care, discharged after 3 nights, absconded. "Absconded," she muttered. Bureaucratic code for "we lost her." But there was more. A petition had been filed at New York County Family Court only days ago. Ex parte application for temporary guardianship of Ava Monroe. Filed not by family, but by Conrad Briggs, former attorney disbarred in 2019 for misappropriation of client funds. Pike's jaw tightened. She knew Briggs by reputation. a scavenger who circled vulnerable estates, sniffing out settlements like a vulture. She snapped a photo of the docket and sent it to Carter with a single line. "We have a problem." The next morning, Carter paced his office as Pike delivered the findings. "She's an orphan," Pike summarized. "Parents killed on I-95. Wrongful death settlement still pending. That money, nearly $2 million, is locked in probate. No legal guardian has been appointed. Enter Briggs. He's filing for emergency guardianship so he can access the settlement under the guise of managing it for Ava." Carter's stomach turned. "And the system might let him?" Pike shrugged grimly. "Ex parte petitions mean the judge hears only one side, his side. If unopposed, he could walk away with control before anyone realizes the conflict. He's betting no one cares enough to object." Carter slammed his palm against the desk. "She's 7 years old. She was sleeping on a staircase with cardboard keys, and some fraud thinks he can turn her life into a bank account?" For a moment, Pike saw not the ruthless hedge fund magnate, but a man cracked open by conscience. "You can challenge it," she said, "but you'll need more than money. You'll need standing. You'll need to prove you're acting in her best interests." "I don't care what it takes," Carter said. "I want her safe. Legally safe." Pike leaned back, studying him. "Then we play by their rules. Family court, guardians ad litem, social workers, psych evals. Are you prepared for that?" His throat tightened, but he nodded. "Yes." That night, Carter stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his condo at the Avery on West 65th Street. The city glittered beneath him, indifferent. His reflection in the glass looked powerful, untouchable, yet inside he felt none of it. He thought of Ava, of the way her tiny hands had summoned Chopin, of the pride with which she held her tattered notebook. A girl who had lost everyone yet still believed in music as if it were oxygen. He had mocked her, then watched her prove him wrong. Now the law threatened to erase her again, to fold her into the machinery of fraud. "No," he whispered to the glass. "Not this time." He picked up the phone. "Get me Thomas Greer, family law, and make it fast." The next morning, Thomas Greer arrived at the office. Broad-shouldered, his suit worn at the elbows, Greer had spent 20 years in New York family court, most of them defending children who had no one else. "You're serious about this?" Greer asked, thumbing through the packet Pike had compiled. "Dead serious," Carter replied. Greer nodded slowly. "Then we move quickly. File our own petition, request a guardian ad litem, initiate a home study. Briggs will push hard, but if we demonstrate stability and best interests, the court will side with us." "Best interests," Carter repeated. The phrase felt heavy. It wasn't a merger, a quarterly report, or a press release. It was a child. Greer packed up the file. "I'll draft the motion tonight, but know this. Once you step into family court, you're no longer CEO Hayes. You're just another adult claiming to protect a child. And the judge will ask, are you saying it because you mean it, or because you don't know what it costs?" Carter glanced toward the window. In his memory, he heard Rachel's voice again, soft and resolute. "Music is the only thing that tells the truth." "I mean it," he said. His voice was steady now. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking of investors or profits. He was thinking of a girl with cardboard keys and of the vow that had slipped from his lips in mockery, now binding him more tightly than any contract. The battle had begun. The number on the paper Lauren Pike had scrawled was barely legible, an address scribbled with her usual shorthand. Carter Hayes held it in his hand as the hired car carried him east across the Queensboro Bridge. Manhattan's skyline receded in the rearview mirror, steel towers gleaming like fortresses he no longer trusted. Ahead, Queens unfolded in rows of modest brick buildings and neon storefronts. They turned onto a quieter street in Astoria, where laundry flapped on balcony lines despite the cold. The driver stopped in front of an aging three-story walk-up with a faded green awning that read, Lombardi's Hardware, since 1971. Beside the shuttered shop, a narrow alley led to a side entrance. "This is it," Pike said, stepping out of her own car behind him. She was dressed in jeans and a leather jacket, blending easily with the neighborhood. "Doyle has been letting her crash here. Said she was safer than in the shelters." Carter frowned. "Doyle, the custodian from Juilliard?" "The same. He's been her guardian angel in his own way." Inside, the hallway smelled of dust and oil paint. They climbed a narrow staircase to the top floor. Doyle was waiting in the doorway, his shoulders stooped but his expression steady. His work shirt bore the faded Juilliard logo. "I figured you'd come," Doyle said quietly. "She's in here." The room was little more than a converted storage closet. A bare bulb dangled from the ceiling. Against one wall stood a makeshift bed, 2 pallets pushed together with a blanket folded neatly. On the other side was something that stopped Carter in his tracks. A cardboard piano, painstakingly cut and drawn. Black keys colored in with marker, fingerings penciled above every note. Next to it lay a spiral notebook, pages crowded with sketches of scales and repertoire. Ava sat cross-legged on the pallet, her brown hair loose around her face, scribbling in the notebook. She looked up as they entered, eyes wary but not frightened. "Hi, Ava," Doyle said softly. "You remember Mr. Hayes?" She nodded. The man who said things he didn't mean. Carter winced. The child's bluntness had a way of piercing him. He stepped closer, his voice gentler than he expected. "I came because I want to understand. I want to help." Ava hugged the notebook to her chest. "People say that a lot." He crouched down, taking in the fragile world she had built here. "Is this how you practice?" he asked, gesturing to the cardboard piano. She nodded. "I listen outside Juilliard practice rooms. When they stop, I copy the fingerings. Then I try them here. Mr. Doyle says I should sleep, but I hear music in my head all night." Carter felt his throat tighten. He glanced at Doyle, who gave a small shrug. "It's the only way she stays sane. Music keeps her alive." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Carter asked. "Tell who?" Doyle countered. "The system lost her months ago. Shelters shuffle kids like paper. I figured she was safer under my watch than back in that chaos." Pike leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "He's right. If ACS knew she was here, they'd haul her off to foster care with strangers. And with Briggs sniffing around, that would be a disaster." At the name, Ava frowned. "Who's Briggs?" Carter hesitated. "Someone who wants to take control of you for the wrong reasons." She hugged her knees tighter. "Like the people at the shelter. They said I was lucky to have a bed, but they didn't care if I cried." Doyle knelt beside her, his weathered hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You're not going back there, kiddo. Not if I can help it." Ava looked from Doyle to Carter. "If I go with you, he has to come too. I don't leave without him." The conviction in her voice startled Carter. This wasn't bargaining. It was loyalty, forged in survival. "I promise," Carter said slowly. "If you come with me, Doyle comes too. That's not negotiable." Her eyes softened just a little. She set the notebook down, opening to a page filled with tiny musical staves. "I wrote this last week. It's not Chopin. It's mine." She placed the paper on the cardboard keys and began to play, her fingers tapping silently, tracing melodies only she could hear. Yet even in silence, Carter saw the phrasing in her body, The rise and fall, the rubato. She didn't need sound to summon music. She was music. He felt something break open in his chest, something he had closed since Rachel's death. "Come with me," he said quietly. "Not just for tonight. For good. I'll do it right, through the courts. No one will take you away again. You'll have a piano, teachers, school, whatever you need. But you have to trust me." Ava looked at Doyle. He gave a small nod. "Okay," she whispered, "but only if he's family too." The three of them sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the promise settling like stone and light at once. Pike finally broke the stillness. "We need to move fast. Briggs could get an ex parte order signed any day now. If that happens, Ava is legally his ward until someone contests it." Carter straightened. "Then we won't give him the chance." He extended his hand to Ava. She hesitated, then placed her small palm in his. Her fingers were cold, fragile, but her grip was steady. "Let's go home," he said. Back in Manhattan, the elevator opened to Carter's condo at the Avery. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Hudson River, glittering under the night sky. The space was sleek, modern, filled with art and silence. Ava clutched Doyle's hand, her eyes wide. "This is your house?" she whispered. "It's where I live," Carter corrected. "But it's not a home. Not yet." She wandered to the corner, where a grand piano sat, gleaming under a spotlight. She approached it slowly, reverently, as if afraid it might vanish if she moved too quickly. Her fingers brushed the keys. "It's real," she breathed. Doyle's eyes misted. Carter stood back, watching as Ava pressed a tentative chord. The sound blossomed, pure and resonant, filling the sterile air of his penthouse with something human. For the first time in years, the walls did not echo with emptiness. They echoed with possibility. The next morning, Carter Hayes sat at the polished conference table in Hayes Capital, not for a board meeting or investment pitch, but for something entirely different. Spread across the surface were stacks of petitions, affidavits, and binders marked with neon tabs. Family court documents. His corporate counsel, usually immersed in mergers and acquisitions, looked uneasy. This was not their arena. Thomas Greer, however, looked perfectly at home. The family law attorney leaned forward, sleeves rolled back, eyes sharp. Beside him, a young social worker flipped through intake forms, and a notary prepared to witness signatures. Carter's office had become a war room, not against rival hedge funds, but against a man exploiting a child. "Let's be clear," Greer began. "Briggs filed an ex parte petition. That means he's trying to get guardianship without notice to anyone else. The judge could sign it tomorrow. If that happens, Ava is legally his ward until we contest. He'll have the right to decide where she lives, who she sees, and, most dangerous, he'll gain access to her wrongful death settlement." Carter's jaw tightened. "Then we have to stop it." "That's why we're here," Greer replied. "We'll file an order to show cause, demanding Briggs prove why guardianship should go to him. We'll attach your sworn affidavit, a home study request, and a proposal for a guardian ad litem. We need to show the court Ava's best interests are being served by you, not a disbarred grifter." The social worker raised her head. "We'll need to conduct an emergency visit at your residence. Document Ava's living conditions, her access to education, her emotional safety." "She slept on cardboard last week," Carter said, unable to keep the edge from his voice. "Now she has a real piano, a warm bed, and 2 adults she trusts. Isn't that enough?" "It's a start," she said gently. "But the law requires proof, not passion." The words stung. Carter had built an empire on proof, profit and loss statements, risk models, audited results. But this was different. Here, proof wasn't a balance sheet. It was a child's right to safety, to stability. Greer slid a form across the table. Sign here. This is your affidavit, your sworn promise to the court. You're taking responsibility for Ava's care, education, health, therapy. It's binding. Carter took the pen, his hand steady. I've signed billion-dollar contracts, he muttered, scrawling his name. None of them mattered as much as this. That afternoon, in a cluttered midtown law office lit by flickering fluorescent tubes, Conrad Briggs leaned back in his chair. His tie was loose, his hair greased, his desk piled high with manila folders that smelled faintly of mildew. He skimmed the court calendar, lips curling. Monroe Ava, minor, guardianship hearing set, perfect. He had spent years circling tragedy like a vulture, filing petitions on behalf of forgotten children, siphoning funds under the pretense of trust management. $1 million here, $2 million there, always masked by paperwork. Ava Monroe was just another file to him. By the time anyone challenges, he muttered, the judge will have already signed. He didn't know that across town, Carter's team was building a wall of evidence higher than any he had faced. Back at the Avery condo, Ava sat at the Steinway in the living room, plinking out scales under Doyle's patient watch. She wore a sweater too big for her, sleeves rolled over twice, her hair tied back with a ribbon Doyle had bought at a corner store. Keep your wrist loose, Doyle encouraged. That's it. Let the sound breathe. Carter entered quietly, papers still in hand. For a moment, he let the sound wash over him. The fragile notes, the old man's steady voice, the child's determined concentration. It was unlike any boardroom he had ever known, yet it felt more purposeful than all of them combined. How was work? Ava asked without looking up. Different, Carter admitted. I had to sign a lot of papers. She glanced at him. For me? Yes, he said simply. Her small smile was answer enough. The next day, Greer escorted Carter into the marble halls of New York County Family Court, 60 Lafayette Street. The building was a far cry from the gleaming towers Carter knew. Here, families huddled on benches, lawyers shouted names across crowded corridors, clerks shuffled stacks of files like a conveyor belt of grief. Greer lowered his voice. This isn't Wall Street. Judges here don't care about your net worth. They care about best interests of the child. Repeat that phrase until it's carved into your skull. I understand, Carter murmured. They filed the order to show cause, attaching the affidavit, Doyle's statement, the social worker's preliminary notes. Within hours, the clerk stamped the papers, setting a date for an emergency hearing. Across the corridor, Carter caught a glimpse of Briggs, slick smile, cheap briefcase, eyes like a hawk. Their gazes locked. For the first time in years, Carter felt the same adrenaline he once felt before hostile takeovers. Only now, the stakes weren't billions. They were a child's life. That evening, Doyle cooked a simple dinner in Carter's penthouse kitchen, pasta with jarred sauce. Ava sat at the island, doodling treble clefs in her notebook. Carter leaned against the counter, the fatigue of legal warfare pressing down. Why is everyone writing papers about me? Ava asked suddenly. Carter exchanged a glance with Doyle. Because the law wants to decide who should take care of you, he explained carefully. But I already decided, Ava said matter-of-factly. I want you and Mr. Doyle. Her certainty shook him. That's what we're fighting for, Carter said softly. Ava put down her pencil. Then we'll win. Because Chopin says truth always sings louder. Doyle chuckled. Carter felt his throat tighten. Out of the mouths of children, truths arrived sharper than any argument. 2 days later, the paperwork war escalated. Briggs filed motions attacking Carter's credibility, questioning his fitness as a guardian. He hired investigators to tail Ava and Doyle, hoping to dig up dirt. Carter responded with his own filings, affidavits from neighbors who saw Doyle caring for her, documentation of her school enrollment application, photographs of Ava practicing in his condo. Each motion filed was another stone laid in the tunnel, dark, endless, suffocating. Yet Carter pressed forward. He had lived in a world where contracts defined loyalty. But here, loyalty was defined by persistence. He would not let Briggs bury Ava under paperwork. Late one night, Greer called with an update. "We've bought time. The judge has agreed to hear arguments next week. But Briggs is pushing hard." Carter stood at his window, the skyline glowing like an empire he no longer recognized. "Let him push," he said. "I'll push harder." He looked over his shoulder. Ava was asleep on the sofa, Doyle draping a blanket over her. Her notebook rested on her chest, pages fluttering in the draft. For the first time, Carter realized he wasn't just defending her future. He was defending his own chance to become something more than a man of capital. He was defending the possibility of family. The tunnel of paperwork stretched on, but at the end of it, he saw her face. That was enough. The courthouse had emptied by dusk. The halls of 60 Lafayette Street were silent except for the echo of janitors' mops and the hum of vending machines. But in Judge Evelyn Park's chambers, the lights still burned. A stack of motions lay on her desk, petitions from desperate parents, affidavits from caseworkers, and at the top, 2 competing emergency filings for one child, Ava Monroe. Judge Park adjusted her glasses, weary but alert. She had handled hundreds of guardianship petitions in her 20-year career, but rarely had she seen filings arrive with such speed and ferocity. On one side, Conrad Briggs, disbarred attorney, now presenting himself as family advocate. On the other, Carter Hayes, billionaire CEO, represented by Thomas Greer, a seasoned family law practitioner. She read through the affidavit. Hayes swore he had taken Ava into his home, provided her with food, medical care, and access to education. He proposed a guardian ad litem, had already scheduled a home study, and pledged funds for both therapy and a Juilliard pre-college scholarship. The words, trauma-informed care, caught her attention. Few petitioners used that phrase correctly. She made a note. Meanwhile, across town, Carter sat in his condo with Greer, Doyle, and Pike. The clock glowed past midnight. Ava was asleep on the sofa, a blanket tucked under her chin, the faint scribble of pencil marks still on her notebook. "The judge could sign either order tonight," Greer explained, rubbing his temples. "If Briggs's ex parte petition goes through, court officers could arrive in the morning to remove Ava. It would be legal, even if immoral." The words hit Carter like ice. "You're saying we could lose her by sunrise?" Greer nodded gravely. "Unless Judge Park grants our order to show cause." Carter's hands clenched. "Then she has to." Pike leaned forward. "Judges don't bow to money. They bow to evidence. And right now, we've given them more than Briggs ever could. Your affidavit, Doyle's statement, the social worker's notes from her preliminary visit. That's why we pushed so hard." Doyle sighed, looking at the sleeping child. "She's been tossed around enough. If they come for her again..." His voice broke. "I don't think she could take it." Carter swallowed. For a man who had once laughed at risk models worth billions, this was the first gamble that truly terrified him. In chambers, Judge Park turned to Briggs's petition. His papers were thin, a skeleton compared to Hayes's mountain of documentation. Briggs argued Ava had no current caregiver and required immediate placement. But his financial disclosures were vague. his history with the bar disciplinary committee glaring. Park frowned. She picked up Hayes's file again, scanning his sworn statements. Temporary custody, home study scheduled, support network in place. The language was precise, professional. But beneath it, she sensed urgency, the kind that only comes when a child's life is tethered to unstable ground. At 12:47 a.m., she lifted her pen. Back at the Avery, Carter's phone buzzed. Greer snatched it up, eyes narrowing as he read the incoming email. Then his shoulders dropped with relief. "She signed," he breathed. Carter stared. "What?" "Judge Park just issued an emergency order. She denied Briggs's ex parte petition, suspended any temporary guardianship for him, and set a fact-finding hearing for next week. She's appointing a guardian ad litem immediately." Doyle exhaled loudly, slumping back against the chair. "So Ava stays?" "She stays," Greer confirmed. "Legally. No one can touch her until the hearing." The words echoed like a reprieve from a sentence. Carter looked at the sleeping child. Her hand curled around the edge of the blanket, her face, finally, at peace. For the first time since he uttered that mocking promise at Lincoln Center, he felt the ground under his feet steady. "Thank God," he whispered. The following day, the order was served. Briggs stormed into the clerk's office demanding explanations, but the ink of Judge Park's signature was unyielding. His petition was suspended, his access to the settlement blocked pending investigation. "Hayes won't last," he snarled to an associate. "He doesn't know the system. He'll crumble before the hearing." But Briggs underestimated the weight of a promise spoken in the dark. That evening, the guardian ad litem arrived at the Avery. Her name was Claire Nguyen, a calm woman in her 40s with the clear-eyed patience of someone who had spent her career listening to children the world ignored. She walked through the penthouse, noting the furnished bedroom prepared for Ava, the shelves now stocked with children's books and school supplies, the piano gleaming in the living room. Doyle answered her questions with quiet honesty, recounting how he had watched Ava sleep in stairwells and practice on cardboard keys. Finally, Claire knelt beside the sofa where Ava sat hugging her notebook. "Do you know why I'm here?" Claire asked. Ava nodded cautiously. "To decide where I belong." "That's right," Claire said softly. "So tell me, what does home mean to you?" Ava's voice was small but clear. "Home is a place where I'm not scared, and where there's a real piano." Claire smiled gently, jotting the words into her notes. "Thank you, Ava. That's very important." Carter stood back, watching the exchange. It struck him that for all his billions, he could not dictate this process. Ava's own voice mattered more than his. That truth humbled him more than any courtroom ever had. Later, after Claire had gone, Doyle brewed tea in the kitchen while Carter tucked Ava into bed. She looked up at him, eyes heavy with sleep. "Will they take me away?" she asked. "No," Carter said firmly. "Not while I'm here." "Promise?" He hesitated. Once promises had been empty currency in his mouth, but not now. "I promise." She nodded, satisfied, and drifted off. Carter stood in the doorway for a long time, the emergency order folded in his pocket like a shield. The battle was far from over. But tonight, at least, Ava was safe. And for the first time in years, so was he. The morning sun filtered through the glass walls of the Avery, casting long stripes of gold across the polished floor. The Steinway Grand gleamed in the living room, its lid open like a black wing ready to take flight. On the sofa, Ava sat nervously with her notebook, chewing on the end of her pencil. She had been told that someone important was coming to talk to her today. "Will it be like school?" she asked Doyle, who was tidying the kitchen. "Not exactly, kiddo," Doyle replied. "More like, they just want to know what life feels like for you here. You just tell the truth. That's all anyone can ask." Ava nodded, though her small hands twisted in her lap. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Carter opened it to find Claire Nguyen, the guardian ad litem assigned by Judge Park. She carried a slim leather folio and wore no-nonsense glasses, her presence calm and professional. "Mr. Hayes," she greeted, shaking his hand. "Thank you for arranging this. The court wants to hear directly from Ava in her own words." "Of course," Carter said. His voice was even, but his chest was tight. He had faced Wall Street hearings and hostile interviews from financial journalists. None of them had unsettled him like this moment. Claire entered the apartment, her gaze sweeping the space. She noted the children's books stacked neatly on a shelf, the small desk set up in the corner, the fridge covered with Ava's drawings of music notes and scales. Everything looked intentional, prepared, not for show, but for use. Finally, her eyes fell on the Steinway. "May I?" she asked. "Please," Carter said. Claire tapped a single key, letting the sound resonate through the room. "Not every child in this city has an instrument like this. I assume Ava uses it?" "She does," Doyle answered. "Every day." Claire smiled faintly. "Then let's begin here." She motioned for Ava to join her at the piano bench. Ava hesitated, clutching her notebook, then climbed up beside the woman. "Hi, Ava," Claire said gently. "My name is Claire. The judge asked me to learn about you. What makes you feel safe? What makes you happy? What makes you scared? There are no wrong answers." Ava bit her lip. "Okay. Would you like to play something before we talk?" Without a word, Ava opened her notebook to a page covered in neat staves and penciled numbers. She placed her hands on the keys and began box invention number 1. The counterpoint unfolded clearly, each voice distinct. Her small body leaned into the phrases with surprising discipline, as if testing herself under the weight of an invisible audience. Claire watched carefully. This wasn't just about skill, it was about focus, resilience, the way the child carried herself under stress. When Ava reached the final cadence, she let her hands fall into her lap. "That was wonderful," Claire said sincerely. "How long have you been playing?" Ava shrugged. "Since forever, but only on cardboard until now." "Cardboard?" Doyle stepped forward. "She used to draw keys and practice fingerings in a storeroom I unlocked at night. This is the first real piano she's had regular access to." Claire jotted a note, her expression thoughtful. She turned back to Ava. "Do you feel different now, having a real piano?" "Yes," Ava said simply. "It feels like breathing, instead of pretending." They moved into questions. "What does a normal day look like for you here?" Claire asked. Ava thought carefully. "I wake up, Mr. Doyle makes oatmeal. Then I practice. Mr. Hayes goes to work, but he comes back for dinner. Sometimes we eat pasta, sometimes soup. At night, I play again until I'm tired." "Do you feel safe here?" "Yes." "Why?" Ava looked at Doyle, then at Carter. "Because nobody yells. Nobody locks the door. Nobody says I'm a problem. They just let me be me." Carter swallowed hard, his throat tightening. Claire leaned forward. "What does the word home mean to you, Ava?" The child's voice was quiet but steady. "Home is a place where I'm not scared, and where there's a real piano." For a moment, silence filled the room. Even Claire, seasoned as she was, felt the weight of the answer. She scribbled the words down word for word. After the interview, Claire asked to speak with Doyle privately. You've been caring for her longer than anyone, she said. Why didn't you alert ACS? Doyle sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Because I've seen the system eat kids alive. Foster homes where they disappear, shelters where they get hurt. I couldn't put her through that. I gave her a room, food, and a safe place to practice. Maybe it wasn't legal, but it was human. Claire studied him, then nodded slowly. Your loyalty may be her strongest protection. She wrote another note. Consider secondary guardianship, standby role. When she finished, Claire gathered her things. I'll report to Judge Park, she told Carter. My recommendation will focus on Ava's stability, attachment, and opportunities here. The court will weigh that heavily. Thank you, Carter said, though his voice betrayed his nerves. She looked at him squarely. Mr. Hayes, this isn't about your wealth or influence. It's about whether Ava thrives in your care. So far, what I've seen is promising. But understand, she is not an investment. She's a child. If you want to keep her, you must stay present. Always. The words struck him like a vow. He nodded. I understand. That night, Carter sat with Ava at the piano bench. She tapped a melody she had written herself, tentative but hopeful. Did I do okay with the lady? She asked. You did better than okay, Carter said. You told the truth. Ava smiled faintly, then leaned against him, her head barely reaching his arm. For a man who had spent years surrounded by silence and marble, the small weight of her trust felt heavier than gold. Doyle watched from across the room, his eyes tired but peaceful. For the first time, he believed Ava's future might not vanish overnight. And Carter, listening to her fragile melody, realized that the real test wasn't in court. It was in the daily music of her life. To protect her was to show up every day without fail. The interview had ended, but the responsibility had only begun. In a dimly lit office on the Lower East Side, Conrad Briggs hunched over his desk, the glow of a single desk lamp illuminating stacks of legal pads and empty coffee cups. His fingers tapped impatiently on a ledger, eyes darting between numbers and false signatures. The plan was almost perfect. Almost. The wrongful death settlement from Michael and Sarah Monroe's fatal crash still sat in limbo, $1.9 million in a probate account. Ava Monroe, the sole heir, had no guardian. Briggs intended to change that. With his ex parte petition stalled by Judge Park's emergency order, he needed another way in. He flipped open a file marked Trust Management, Projected Fees. The numbers gleamed like bait. 2% administrative fee, annual oversight charges, trust restructuring, he smirked. By the time anyone asks questions, the account will be bled dry. But he hadn't counted on the tenacity of Lauren Pike. At the same time, in a quiet cafe in Midtown, Pike sat across from a clerk from the probate court, a woman who owed her favors from NYPD days. Between sips of bitter coffee, the clerk slid a sealed envelope across the table. This is off the record, the clerk whispered. You didn't get it from me. Pike opened the file. Inside were photocopies of Briggs's recent filings. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned. He had forged consent letters supposedly from distant cousins of Ava, waiving interest in guardianship. Problem was, those cousins didn't exist. Son of a... she muttered under her breath. He's manufacturing heirs. She flipped further. There was an invoice for trustee consultation fees already billed against the settlement, dated before he even had standing. Fraud, plain and simple. That night, Pike presented her findings in Carter's condo. Ava was asleep in the next room, her music notebook spread across the nightstand. Doyle sat in a chair, his face grim. Briggs is running a kickback scheme, Pike explained. He's been forging consent documents claiming non-existent relatives signed off. He's lining up shell accounts to drain the settlement once he gets control. We're talking outright fraud, not just shady guardianship. Carter's jaw tightened. How much? Nearly 2 million, she said flatly. Doyle cursed under his breath. That money belongs to her future, not to a parasite. Greer leaned forward, his legal pad covered with notes. This changes everything. Fraud isn't just a family court issue, it's criminal. If we can prove this, the district attorney will have jurisdiction. And the attorney grievance committee will bury him. Carter's eyes burned. Then prove it, whatever it takes. For days, Pike shadowed Briggs's movements. She watched him meet with a man outside a dingy bar in Queens, exchanging envelopes. She tailed him to a strip mall office where trust management consultants filed in and out, ghost companies registered to P.O. boxes. With each piece of evidence, the puzzle formed. Briggs was not just exploiting Ava. He was exploiting the system itself, turning vulnerable children into profit streams. One evening, Pike broke into a smile as she scanned a trail of emails subpoenaed through an old contact at the DA's office. The chain revealed kickback agreements between Briggs and a consultant, promising him a percentage of every withdrawal. She forwarded the files to Greer with the subject line, "Got him." The following morning, Carter, Greer, and Pike met in Greer's office, a cramped space overlooking Foley Square. Stacks of case law and yellowing certificates lined the walls. "This is enough," Greer said, holding up the evidence. "Forgery, misrepresentation, attempted conversion of a minor's estate. I'll file an ethics complaint with the Attorney Grievance Committee tonight. Pike, get this to the DA's Financial Crimes Bureau. Once they open an investigation, Briggs is finished." Carter exhaled slowly. For the first time in days, he felt the air lighten. But Ava's voice from the previous night still echoed in his ears. "Home is a place where I'm not scared." He knew this wasn't about defeating a crooked lawyer. It was about making sure no one like Briggs could ever circle her again. 2 days later, the trap snapped shut. Briggs strutted into family court with his cheap briefcase, expecting another skirmish with Greer. Instead, a pair of investigators from the DA's office intercepted him at security. "Conrad Briggs?" one asked. "Yeah. What of it?" "You're under arrest for fraud, forgery, and attempted conversion of a minor's trust account." The handcuffs clicked. Briggs sputtered, "This is absurd! I'm her legal advocate!" "Not anymore," the investigator said coldly. The courthouse buzzed with whispers as Briggs was led away. For once, justice moved swiftly. That evening, Carter broke the news to Doyle over a glass of whiskey in the kitchen. "He's done," Carter said. "The DA has him. The settlement's safe." Doyle exhaled in relief, rubbing his eyes. "Good. The bastard won't get near her again." From the living room, Ava looked up from her music sheets. "Who won't get near me?" Carter paused. He had vowed never to lie to her. "A man who wanted to take what belonged to you," he said carefully. "But he can't anymore. You're safe." Ava studied him. "You mean my music?" Carter smiled faintly. "Yes, your music, and your future." She considered this, then nodded solemnly. "Then I'll keep practicing." The simplicity of her answer made Carter's throat tighten. She didn't care about the millions waiting in an account. She cared only about the notes, the keys, the sound that made her feel alive. That night, after Ava was asleep, Doyle stood beside Carter at the window. The city pulsed below them, endless and indifferent. "You've changed," Doyle said quietly. Carter frowned. "What do you mean?" "You used to be a man with walls. All glass and steel, no warmth inside. But look at you now, fighting tooth and nail for a child you didn't even know 2 weeks ago. Rachel would be proud. The name hit Carter like a soft blow. His sister. The one he had failed to protect. "Maybe this is my chance," Carter murmured. "To do right this time." Doyle nodded. "Then hold on to it. Don't let the system or your own fear take her away." Carter looked toward the bedroom where Ava slept. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future, not measured in profits, but in scales, lessons, and laughter. A future with a child who believed in him. The dirty scheme had collapsed. But the real battle, the one for permanence, for family, was just beginning. The family court of New York County was already crowded when Carter, Doyle, and Ava arrived on the morning of the hearing. The marble lobby echoed with the shuffle of papers, the chatter of attorneys, and the nervous whispers of families. For Ava, the building felt too large, too sharp. She held tightly to Carter's hand, her small fingers buried in his palm. "Remember," Doyle said softly, leaning down to her ear, "you don't have to say anything you don't want to. Just be honest if they ask." Ava nodded, her notebook clutched against her chest like armor. Upstairs, in courtroom 3C, Judge Evelyn Park presided from the high bench. Her black robe contrasted with her sharp, watchful eyes. She had reviewed the thick stack of reports over the past week. The gal's interview notes, the home study from the social worker, the psychological evaluation. Today, the courtroom would weigh all of it under the best interests of the child standard, the cornerstone of family law. Thomas Greer set his briefcase on the table and gave Carter a reassuring nod. "This is it," he said. "Stay calm. The evidence is on our side." The proceedings began with the guardian ad litem, Claire Nguyen, taking the stand. She spoke with quiet authority, detailing her visits with Ava, her observations of the home environment, and her assessment of Ava's attachments. "Miss Monroe has developed a strong, stable bond with both Mr. Hayes and Mr. Doyle," Claire said firmly. "She identifies them as her family. She feels safe in their care. She has access to education, therapy, and her musical development is being nurtured. In my professional opinion, removal from this environment would cause unnecessary trauma." "Thank you, Ms. Nguyen," Judge Park said. "Your recommendation is noted." Carter's chest eased slightly. He glanced at Ava, who sat beside Doyle in the front row, swinging her legs nervously but listening intently. Next came the social worker, who presented the results of the home study. Photographs of Ava's bedroom, her desk, and the Steinway piano were entered into evidence. The report noted regular meals, consistent routines, and strong emotional support from both men. "Mr. Hayes has demonstrated a willingness to integrate trauma-informed care," the social worker testified. "He's committed to therapy, schooling, and structured stability. In my assessment, the home environment meets and exceeds the standards required." The courtroom buzzed with quiet approval. The psychologist followed, summarizing Ava's evaluation. "She displays resilience despite significant loss. Her cognitive abilities, especially in music, are advanced. However, she remains vulnerable to instability. Consistency of care is essential. Disruption of her current environment would likely set back her progress." When the reports concluded, Judge Park looked to Carter. "Mr. Hayes, would you like to make a statement?" He rose, buttoning his suit jacket, though his hands trembled slightly. He was not speaking to investors now. He was speaking to the law about the life of a child. "Your Honor," he began, his voice low but steady, "I came into Ava's life by accident, by arrogance, even. I mocked her once, but she changed me. She carries music inside her that the world should hear, but more than that, she deserves what every child deserves: safety, love, and a future free of fear. I cannot undo the losses she's endured, but I can promise her this: She will never be alone again. Not while I have breath in me. With Mr. Doyle's support, with proper oversight and a trust managed transparently, Ava will have the home, the education, and the care she needs. I don't say this as a CEO. I say this as a man who failed his sister once, and who will not fail this child. He stopped, breath catching. The courtroom was silent. Even the stenographer paused, eyes damp. Judge Park inclined her head. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Finally, the judge shuffled her papers and lifted her pen. The air in the courtroom seemed to freeze. Ava clutched Doyle's arm, her heart pounding. In considering guardianship, Judge Park began, the court must apply the best interests of the child standard. Factors include stability, safety, emotional attachment, and the capacity to provide for the child's development. Having reviewed the guardian ad litem's recommendation, the home study, the psychological evaluation, and testimony today, the court finds that Ava Monroe's best interests are served by remaining in the care of Mr. Carter Hayes. A murmur swept the courtroom. Carter closed his eyes in relief, Doyle exhaling sharply beside him. Judge Park continued. Further, in recognition of Mr. Doyle's long-standing role as a protector and caregiver, the court hereby designates him as secondary guardian under the standby guardianship statute. In the event Mr. Hayes is unable to serve, Mr. Doyle will assume responsibility immediately, ensuring continuity of care. Doyle blinked in surprise, his eyes misting. Ava squeezed his hand tighter. Additionally, Judge Park said, the wrongful death settlement shall be placed in a minor's trust managed by a corporate trustee independent of Mr. Hayes, with oversight by the court. Disbursements shall be for Ava's education, therapy, and general welfare. Mr. Hayes is appointed primary custodian, with financial stewardship delegated to the trustee for transparency. She set down her pen, her voice softening. This court believes Ava Monroe is no longer adrift. She has found a home. The gavel struck once. Custody is awarded. Case closed. The sound of applause broke protocol, quiet clapping from observers in the back rows, moved by the rare glimpse of justice that felt human. Carter knelt to Ava's level. She looked at him, wide-eyed. Does this mean I stay? She whispered. Yes, Carter said, tears threatening. You stay. Forever. She threw her arms around him. Then she pulled Doyle into the embrace, her small voice muffled against their shoulders. Thank you for being my family. The courtroom blurred as Carter finally allowed the tears to fall. For years he had measured worth in numbers, in contracts, in cold logic. Today, worth was measured in a child's arms around his neck, in the word family spoken, without hesitation. That evening, back at the Avery, Doyle cooked dinner as usual, simple roasted chicken with carrots. Ava set the table herself, humming Bach under her breath. When they sat down together, she raised her glass of milk solemnly. To us, she said. To us, Carter echoed, clinking his glass against hers. For the first time, the condo no longer felt like a sterile cage of wealth. It felt alive, warm, like the very definition Ava had given the gal, a place without fear and a piano waiting in the corner. The judgment had been rendered, but in truth, the family had already been chosen, by loyalty, by love, by music. A year passed, measured not in business quarters but in melodies. In that span, Ava Monroe transformed from a child who practiced on cardboard keys to a young musician whose name had begun to stir quiet wonder at Juilliard's pre-college division. Her days were filled with scales, theory lessons, therapy sessions, and laughter at a kitchen table that now always had a place set for three. For Carter Hayes, the change was equally profound. He still led Hayes Capital, but the relentless pursuit of wealth had softened into something steadier. He no longer stayed in the office past midnight or chased every deal with the desperation of a man haunted by loss. Instead, his evenings were spent in the glow of a Steinway, listening to Ava practice Bach or improvise her own fragile tunes. He had become something no boardroom had ever prepared him for: a father. And Doyle, faithful Doyle, remained the anchor. He cooked, counseled, reminded Carter to breathe, and reminded Ava to eat. The secondary guardian provision Judge Park had written into her order became more than a legal safeguard. It was a daily truth. They were three people stitched together not by blood, but by loyalty, trust, and a stubborn refusal to let each other go. On a crisp November afternoon, Ava stood backstage at Carnegie Hall's Wild Recital Hall. The historic wood paneling, the golden chandeliers, the hush of the audience beyond the curtain, all of it seemed impossibly vast for a girl who once whispered Chopin's phrases into the cold glass of Lincoln Center. She wore a simple white dress, her brown hair pulled back with a ribbon Doyle had ironed himself. Her notebook rested on the piano, though tonight she would not need it. Tonight she would play from memory, both the music she had studied and the music she had written herself. Carter stood just behind her, his hand steady on her shoulder. "Nervous?" he asked. Ava shook her head. "Not really. The piano isn't scary anymore. Not when I know you're out there." Doyle chuckled softly. "That's my girl." The stage manager signaled. Ava took a deep breath and walked into the spotlight. She began with Chopin, of course. The opening chords of the Ballad No. 1 filled the hall, the same storm and prayer she had first played for Carter. Only now the notes were fuller, shaped by months of teaching and her own unshakable will. The audience leaned forward, captured by the sound pouring from such small hands. Then she paused, turned a page, and whispered into the microphone, "This one is mine. I call it Home Song." Her fingers drifted into a melody she had written late at night in the Avery, when the city lights reflected in the glass and Carter thought she was asleep. It was tender, weaving between minor and major like a child learning to trust. The rhythm carried the steady patience of Doyle, the harmonies echoed Carter's strength, and the final cadence lingered like a whispered promise. "You are safe now." When the last note faded, silence held for a heartbeat, and then the hall erupted in applause. Carter rose to his feet, clapping harder than any investor had ever seen him. Doyle wiped his eyes shamelessly. For both men, the music was more than a performance. It was proof that the long nights of fear, the battles in court, the brokenness of the past had been transformed into something whole. Afterward, in the green room, Ava ran into Carter's arms. "Did I do okay?" she asked breathlessly. "You did more than okay," Carter said, voice thick. "You gave us a home in music." Doyle smiled, pulling them both into a hug. And the world heard it. In the weeks that followed, the story of the little girl who once practiced on cardboard keys spread beyond the recital hall. The New York Times ran a feature. From Orphan to Prodigy, Ava Monroe's Journey to Carnegie. Interviews followed, not about tragedy, but about resilience. Carter, wary of publicity, agreed to only one press statement, delivered at Juilliard. "This is not just about one child's talent. It's about every child who slips through the cracks. That's why we've created the Avery Fund, a foundation dedicated to supporting orphan children with gifts in music and the arts. Every dollar goes to their instruments, their lessons, their futures." The Avery Fund soon became a beacon. Letters arrived from across the country, children in foster care, single mothers asking about scholarships, teachers nominating students who played on broken violins or battered guitars. For each one, Carter felt Rachel's presence, as if his sister's dream had not been lost but reborn through Ava and the children who would follow. One evening in December, as the first snow dusted the city, the three of them sat by the window in the Avery. Ava was curled on the rug, sketching new notes. Doyle read the paper, and Carter gazed at the Steinway glowing in lamplight. Ava looked up. "Do you think Mom and Dad can hear me when I play?" Carter knelt beside her. "I think they can. And I think they're proud." She leaned against him. "I'm glad I stayed." "So am I," he whispered. Doyle folded his paper, his voice warm. "Family isn't always where you start. Sometimes it's where you end up." Ava smiled. "Then this is where I ended up." Carter felt the words settle into his chest like a final chord resolving. After years of chasing power, after nights haunted by silence, he finally understood. Wealth was not measured in numbers. It was measured in the sound of a child's laugh echoing through a home, in the trust of a man who had become his brother, in the fragile notes of home song still ringing in his ears. Months later, Ava performed again, this time not in Carnegie, but in the small recital room of a Bronx community center funded by the Avery Fund. Dozens of children sat on folding chairs, wide-eyed, clutching violins, flutes, and battered clarinets. She played not to impress, but to share. When she finished, she told them simply, "I used to play on cardboard. If I can be here, so can you." The children erupted in cheers. Doyle laughed, clapping along. Carter, standing in the back, closed his eyes. The journey that had begun with a cruel joke at Lincoln Center had become something none of them could have foreseen. A legacy of healing, a melody that outlasted sorrow. And in that moment, Carter Hayes knew he had finally kept his promise. And so, from a cardboard piano in a storage room to the golden light of Carnegie Hall, Ava's journey reminds us that family is not always where we begin, but where love chooses to stay. Carter, Doyle, and Ava found each other against every odd, and in doing so, found healing. Thank you, dear friends, for staying with us until the very end of this story. If it touched your heart, we'd be grateful if you subscribed and joined us for more stories of hope, healing, and second chances.